Welcome to the Healer and a Dreamer video YouTube channel. This is Conversations with Ina and Martin. C.G. Jung's Aeon researches into the phenomenology of the self, the shadow. Um, Welcome, Ina. How are you?
I'm great, Martin. How are you today?
Good, good.
Good.
Phenomenology. Thanks. Sometimes
It's
haunts
a
me
great,
still.
it is a great mantra. I agree. So
Huh.
just before you and I got online, we talked about the purpose of these conversations and how we are doing our absolute best to be in service in our own little way to the Divine Mother, and how and may she ignite the light in all our listeners of their hearts.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I was meditating this morning on this, what is Aeon in this book that Jung wrote? Aeon
Mhm.
researches into the phenomenology of the self. uh, it's a it's an astrological study of this relationship with the anima mundi, or the soul of the world. And this personality sometimes is attributed masculine attributes, and sometimes it is feminine in attribute.
Mhm.
And so I thought we'd start from that perspective in our search today, um, and go with um, Aeon. And what is Aeon? Aeon, the god of perpetual time, eternity, and the zodiac. Here, this picture is Aeon, the god of the ages, in the celestial sphere decorated with the zodiac signs.
Mhm.
You pointed out that he has his hands directly on Pisces, the age of Pisces. Between a green and a dismantled tree, summer and winter, before him is the Mother Earth, Tellus, Roman Gaia, with her four children, the four seasons. And so in alchemy, this personality, the soul of the world, was called the anima mundi, the
Mhm.
soul of the world. And here are three different pictures from Jung's books, from his alchemical studies. Here we have Mother Nature, um, Aeon, but as a feminine deity. It's called the Anima Mundi. Here is the depiction, very much like Dante, the seven lower world and the seven higher worlds. We have a complex uh, definition of the material world, and then we have the soul of the world, and here she is in her full beauty. Here she's referred to as the Anima Mercurii. Mercury being an hermaphroditic god, the planet Mercury, or in alchemy, Mercurius, who is about the soul of the world, or understanding that uh, the actual zodiac is a manifestation of the God principle. I think this is pretty phenomenal that Jung would write a book, a psychiatrist, psychologist would write a book specifically aimed at understanding um, the world from a mystical, alchemical, astrological perspective, and yet giving it a very psychological um, explanation. Or he starts with the ego, and then today we're doing the shadow, and then
Mhm.
we have the sizigi, the anima and the animus, and then the self, and the book goes on. And so that's kind of how I explain astrology too, is from that same perspective. um how does that resonate with you?
Well, it served me great dearly the moment you and I started working, and we dove such deeply from the astrological and psychological standpoint into my own personal chart, and that's what you do with many of your clients. And I definitely have to say this, like you like to call the pop astrology, has nothing to do once you start going into such depth of the way that Jung is taking it, right?
Hmm.
Understanding, to understanding which part of you is in the light and which part of you is in the shadows, which part of your chart is in the light and in the shadows, and definitely lines up the work for you, clear work as to what you need to pay attention to and what you need to work with. It literally rocked my world. I cannot even say it any other way.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I wanted to acknowledge the comment that Carol made about the taught tarot card Aeon.
Of
And then
course.
this morning in my own reading, I got also the world that is in the um, Rider Waite Tarot, and here we have the four elements and the anima mundi or Aeon, and the hermaphroditic nature of the soul, how God can be both masculine and feminine, and we're going to get into that in our next chapter. It's all really fascinating how it all comes together, isn't it?
Hmm.
So here we have the world or the anima mundi or Aeon. And here we have the astrological studies. So we were talking about astrology and how it mirrors this process that we're going through. And so here we have the zodiac as ego and self. So that was our first video, the center being the ego and the whole world that I live in. Part of it I'm conscious of, part of it I'm not conscious of. And that is also a symbol for the anima mundi and the soul of the world. So when we look at a chart, when we look at the zodiac, we're really looking at Aeon, the god of the ages, the god of time, the god of astrology, or the anima mundi, the soul of the world. And then now we're into chapter 2, which is the shadow. And so the first definition that we make in the zodiac is we draw a line called the horizon. And the horizon is the ascendant or the rising sign and the descendant or the setting sign. So we have the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. Everything above the horizon is daytime, everything below is night. So we have light and dark, light and shadow. The early um, Gnostics called this the binarious, the devil, or the number two. And so here we have number one. This is the one, and this is the two. The one dividing itself into two, into light and dark, or day and night, or light and shadow. And so that confrontation of opposites become manifested in the zodiac, in the very basic definitions of the zodiac. And so the shadow principle, and this confrontation of opposite. I know me and you have talked a lot about the confrontation of opposite lately. How does
Hmm.
that sit with you?
Well, today I'm much better than a week ago. I've observed myself, I guess I would say, enough where there is quite a few things have come from into the light from the dark in my own sort of process. And even though I am, I'm grateful with the results, but seeing something within you as a shadow, which you have grown to identify yourself with, is tricky. It's not a clear cut for for you to discern, if you like, right? And you have to, I definitely had to apply patience, and I had to apply quite a bit of kindness to myself, because seeing for what is showing up is not quite necessarily pleasant, or I wouldn't say pleasant or unpleasant, but there is a certain disbelief to you where you like, really, this is actually me, this is actually what's happening. And like I like to call, the abnormality becomes a normality, and at that point it's, this discerning one from the other is quite interesting. However, confrontation of the opposites does create this pressure cooker within you and within the psyche that
Hmm.
helps you birth, that helps you push out of you something that has been locked away from you, and you become so much more spacious within yourself. And that transformation is uncanny, truly is.
Jung talks about how a person who hasn't integrated the shadow, they're
Mhm.
kind of a cardboard type of personality. You know,
Sure, yeah.
the integration of the shadow gives body to the personality. You become much more well defined.
Amen.
Jung talks about it being a one-sided personality. If you
Mhm.
don't do the work of the shadow, you're
Mhm.
one-sided, and
Mhm.
one-sided is it makes you so susceptible to psychic infection and
Mhm.
to becoming, victim of your environment instead of being empowered to be who you are
Mhm.
fully. So
Mhm.
um, I compiled what I did is I looked at the chapter 2 of Aeon, and I highlighted some quotes that I will share with you.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Okay, and so here's our first quote. Um, so here's the Zodiac, and here's our first quote. So we have the shadow is the moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality.
Mhm.
Um, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. So the integration of the shadow, first and foremost, it's a moral consideration. It's a
Oh,
moral
it's
effort.
such a important, um, like, this sentence almost defines the whole rhythm of the practice, because an unhealthy ego can justify literally anything, and by justifying it, it feels satisfied, so it sublimates and it says, well, I am because of whatever, I did this because of whatever, and there is always an explanation, and there is always sublimation, justification, and then you kind of you justify and accept for who you are, but what you're accepting at that moment is the abnormality. And
Right, right.
that's why, moral effort to this work is imperative.
And it's not easy. And yes, what you described, but Jung goes into further detail. So to become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real.
Exactly.
So this, so to first of all acknowledge that I have a dark side to my personality.
Exactly.
It's
Hmm.
it's real and it's present. And if we don't
Hmm.
acknowledge it, then we're half of a person.
Hmm.
This act is central, is in central, is the central condition for
Hmm.
any kind of self-knowledge, and it therefore, as a rule, meets with considerable resistance. Indeed, self-knowledge as a psychotherapeutic measure frequently requires much painstaking work extending over a long period. And so it's not that easy, to integrate that shadow.
It
Uh,
is Aeon, isn't it?
well, that's an interesting thing, huh? The shadow. part of ourself as that part of ourself that is the spirit also. You know, we were talking about
Mhm.
that in your own dreams and how the inner child, you know, the inner God, you know, can be fussy and it can be shadowy in nature, but
Mhm.
that's the unintegrated, so that the darkness is actually part of the light. Huh? That's a great riddle in this whole process.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, oh, what happened here? Do you see the file? What happened?
Nope. I see your desktop. It's okay. Find
That,
it.
yeah, this is what what I pressed the wrong button. Let's do that again. Here we go. Way better. It's technology, huh? Uh,
Can't
you,
live. Can't live with it. Can't live without it.
yeah, yeah. You make a mistake, you pay. Um, and that's, you know, we don't do any editing, and so it is kind of what you see is what you get. But we try to deliver the message here.
Organic as it comes. You got it.
That's right.
No editing, Mark. There's no editing, Mark Norina.
Closer examination of the dark characteristics, that is, the inferiorities constituting the shadow, reveals that they have an emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, and accordingly, an obsessive or better, possessive quality. That's really big, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's actually pretty heavy. Yep.
The emotional nature, you know, so all of us are confronted with emotional sides of our personality that are obsessive and that feel like possessive in quality.
Mm-hmm.
Emotion, incidentally, is not an activity of the individual, but something that happens to him.
Mm-hmm.
Jung calls that effects. Effects occur usually where adaptation is weakest, and at the same time, they reveal the reason for its weakness,
Mm-hmm.
namely a certain degree of inferiority and the existence of a lower level of personality.
Mm-hmm.
So you become aware of your shadow through emotions that have an obsessive and possessive nature. These effects point to a weakness in adaptation. What is a weakness in adaptation? What does that mean?
Well, I think that ego, an unhealthy ego, does not like the weakness because we get taken by the emotion, correct? And then
Mhm.
once the emotion takes over us, we become very weak and unstable and all over the place, so to speak, right? Everything is just goes off the charts. There is no logic, right? Or there is way too much logic, even sometimes.
Uh,
But nevertheless, it reveals what really underneath it all and what is the driving force.
Beautiful, beautiful. Jung speaks of, and astrology speaks of the same four qualities of nature. In astrology, we talk about fire, air, water, and earth. In Jungian psychology, we talk about intuition, feeling,
Mhm.
sensation, and thinking, the four functions. So these are the functions of the adaptations. How we deal with the material world, we deal to these four functions, the four elements, or again, thinking, feeling, inspiration, intuition and sensation. These functions are how we adapt. Now, in the development of the personality, we have one dominant feature, one dominant, element that we usually work with, and then the unadapted part of ourselves, the elements that we haven't developed in our psychological wholeness, in our psychic economy, they become unadapted, and they represent the lower level of our personality. So that if we have a weak earth element, then the element of earth will be archaic. So on this lower level, it's controlled or scarcely controlled emotions. One behaves more or less like a primitive who is not only the passive victim of his effects, but also singularly incapable of moral judgment. So the shadow manifests itself in the element that we're least adapted to. And so that's why astrology is such a great tool, is because it gives us an idea of where we are in terms of the four elements. And so have you studied your own balance of your own four elements?
I don't think you and I ever went through that, did we?
We did at the beginning, and that's really an important part, you know. And so the part of us that is the weakest
Mm-hmm.
in the four elements is where
Mm-hmm.
the shadow, you know. So for me, the the least integrated or adapted element is the earth element. It's the weakest in my chart. So the
Mm-hmm.
earth element is stability, security, um, you know, everything that one connects with the earth element in, you know, in, well, operating a video correctly, or saying the word phenomenology, you know. The element, I'm much more intuitive,
Sure.
much more feeling type than I'm
Sure.
good at pressing buttons and editing videos, you know. So the
Sure.
earth element is the weakest, and
Mhm.
that's where the shadow intrudes, you know. When the shadow intrudes, it's always about the earth element for me.
And
And
that
so,
is part of your astrological chart.
yes, yes,
And it shifts based on what year you're into and
everything. Well, it's what it does is it looks at where all your planets are.
sure.
And then there's a little box. We could, in the next video, I'll bring a chart so we can see it. But there's a little box at the bottom that
Yeah.
tells us about the earth and the water and the air and the fire elements, and where
Uh-huh.
the planets are, and what element is dominant and what element
Mm.
is weak. So for the next video, we'll take a little bit of a break and look at that, so that our viewers can see in their own chart. But
Sure.
in the lowest element, or the least adapted element, is where the shadow gets itself seen. Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Okay, so then let's
I
go.
like that.
It's That's what I
So the
figured.
least the element you have, which in your case you're saying it's earth,
Yeah,
that's where it will essentially hide itself.
this is exactly. I'm always confronted with. I have Pluto and Saturn as my only two planets in Earth signs, and so it makes it very difficult. So this paragraph is really important,
Oh
and
yes,
so
it's my favorite one.
so the system of projections and how that works. So although with insight and goodwill, the shadow can to some extent be assimilated into the conscious personality, experience shows that there are certain features which offer the most obstinate resistance to moral control and prove almost impossible to influence.
Mm.
These resistances are usually bound up with projections, which are not recognized as such, and their recognition is a moral achievement beyond the ordinary. While some traits peculiar to the shadow can be recognized without too much difficulty as one's own personal qualities, in this case, both insight and goodwill are unavailing because the cause of the emotion appears to lie beyond all possibility of doubt in the other person. So if we look back at the last paragraph, where we have emotional effect,
Mm-hmm.
well, when we are triggered by another person,
Mm-hmm.
similar, uncontrollable, possessive, obsessive types of reactions,
Mm-hmm.
then we can see that the shadow or my weakest aspect of my personality are being projected on the other, and I'm experiencing it in the other person. That is projection. We are projecting our own worst part of ourselves onto another, and we're experiencing it triggered. We all know these kind of personalities that trigger us, and
Mm-hmm.
those people that trigger us emotionally with irrational reactions, they tend to be the people we project our dark side on.
Okay, so let me give you an example, and you tell me whether I understand this correctly. Because for me, it's a personal challenge, right? Because I kind of get it, and it's not as tangible as I would like it to be. So Martin said, Martin called me a word, and that word, really ignited strong emotions in me. Once I know that that word, whatever Martin said, has triggered me, I understand I need to sit with those emotions, express them through writing, express them through art as much as I can in order for me to understand what emotion is rising out. And this is me working on my shadow. Now, Martin, by saying this word and watching how Ina um, and what and watching Ina, right, getting so emotional, sees his projection in Ina. So
Right.
Ina sees Ina is faced by shadow because she is experiencing an emotion, and Martin watching Ina is watching his projection. Is that correct?
Yes, basically. Let me give you an example that's more personal,
Okay,
and sometimes more personal make more sense. A
sure.
number of years ago, there was a famous astrologer traveling through town,
Okay,
and I went and saw him,
okay,
and I got so triggered by him.
okay.
5 minutes into his lecture, I had to leave the room. I couldn't handle it.
Sure, fair.
The
So
guy,
you had an emotion.
well, the thing is that he, his delivery and his interaction with the public was very inflated,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the signs of sublimations and all of the messiah complexes and all of the things that really Jung warns us about
Mm-hmm.
were fully exhibited in that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't stay there. I had to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then doing the work of understanding what had happened, then I realized that I had all of the same qualities.
Sure.
And that jealous, intense emotional reaction
Mm-hmm.
was a warning to me about my own shadow.
Agree. Yes, that's a shadow.
Okay,
Agree.
so
Yeah.
that I see my shadow in another, and I react in an emotional, effective way
Sure.
in which I have jealousy and anger towards that person, I
Yes.
can project it on that person and blame it and hate him, or I can realize that what was triggered in me is what part of me that resembles or that does exactly what I accuse him of doing. So I was accusing
No,
this
I
person.
understand what you're saying. So your accusation of him is the shadow that is you are carrying and not seeing within you, but the projection that is triggering them is your jealousy of him.
Exactly. And all of the
Okay.
things that I reacted to him, and,
Okay.
and I could have really pointed it out at him and I could have accused him of it. But then, really, with further analysis, I had to be honest with myself and realize that everything I was triggered about is in my own process. And then it triggered a huge, huge evolution, my own process, to realize that I was victim of those things myself.
Hmm.
So that's the withdrawal of the projection, is to realize that what I accuse another, or what really triggers me in another, is actually within me. That's why I'm being triggered. And if I can own up to that, if Jung talks about that as being the essential, he calls it, he says, there's nothing that furthers intimacy more than the withdrawal of projection. We project our shadow onto our partners, and then we fight our own shadow and so then if you have two members of a couple and each projects their own shadow on the other, that's a mess, isn't it? And that's going
No,
to
for
be a
sure.
very,
For
and
sure.
so the realization that what I accuse you of doing, I am doing myself.
Hmm.
That's the first step in developing a relationship that is co-creative versus codependent.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
That was deep. We did good on that one.
Well, sure.
What?
It's a one step. It's almost like understanding the projection. It goes deeper than understanding your own shadow.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's that part of the shadow that is the most difficult to integrate, is the one that I project on others because I don't want to see it in myself.
Exactly.
So no
Exactly.
matter how obvious it may be to the neutral observer that it is a matter of projections, there is little hope that the subject will perceive this himself. He must be convinced that he throws a very long shadow before he is willing to withdraw his emotionally toned projections from their object. And so that's really important. So, as we know, it is not the conscious subject, but the unconscious which does the projecting. So, I'm not conscious of this.
Of course.
Well, that's, this word projection, we think that we can be conscious of it, but really it's in those dark emotional reaction to another human that offers us the insight to our own projections. But it requires, but see, here's what happens when we don't integrate our projection. One meets with projection, one does not make them. The effect of projection is to isolate the subject from his environment, since instead of a real relation to it, there is now only an illusory one. Projections change the world into the replica of one's unknown face. In the last analysis, therefore, they lead to a not autoerotic or autistic, or what they called narcissistic. Narcissistic people do not see that they're projecting their own shadow on others. Um, condition in which one dreams a world whose reality remains forever unattainable. And call it the psychopaths in our midst. How does that feel?
Well, it's, you see, it's for me, the mirroring, I pretty much packed it down, right? I honestly, the moment, I'm okay, dealing with somebody, talking to somebody, and the moment my emotion gets triggered, I'm like a hawk. It's almost like an immediate, I'll hold on to it, and I almost have to stop the conversation. Just I need a moment and go within myself in order for me to unpack it. Or some, obviously, I'm capable of doing it afterwards. But the fact that it triggered me, I'm almost instantly on it because I know it's mirroring something about me. Da 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 da. And once I unpack my emotion, whether it's anger, da, da, it's all good. But to go deeper to understand what projected this one in the first place, why did you experience this in the first place, is really goes much deeper.
Absolutely, 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 absolutely. And it can also go to a collective level where
Sure.
one country can project their, just like we can project on the Russians
Mm-hmm.
exactly what we're guilty of ourselves. Jung had a word for this. He called it an enantodromia. Enantodromia means that secretly we are that which we hate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If we hate another person or another country or another race, what we hate, what we are pointing towards is the dark side of what is within us.
Mm-hmm.
So just imagine, so this is like the first step in psychological growth, is to realize I have a shadow, and two, that I project my shadow upon others, and three, my job is to withdraw the projection and face my shadow by, when I see it in others, to be responsible emotionally, to be able to get the message that this is my shadow that is triggering me.
Mm-hmm.
That's really big.
It is. It is.
So I think we got one more quote here.
Okay.
I think, therefore I am. Okay, beautiful picture of Jung in his study.
Mm-hmm.
I've never met the man, but man, do I ever love him. It is often tragic to see how blatantly a man bungles his own life and the life of others, yet remains totally incapable of seeing how much the whole tragedy originates in himself, and how he continually feeds it and keeps it going. Not consciously, of course, of course, for consciously he is engaged in bewailing and cursing a faithless world that recedes further and further into the distance. Rather, it is an unconscious factor which spins the illusions, that veils his world, and what is being spun is a cocoon, which in the end will completely envelope him. So the isolating effect of not integrating the shadow, we can't really be in a true relationship with another unless we have integrated our shadow. And when we haven't integrated our shadow, we live in an illusion. It's not the real world. And the face that we meet on the outside is our own unintegrated shadow.
Mm-hmm.
That explains, a lot about why some people are actually incapable of waking up
Mm-hmm.
to the reality of the world, is because they're so wrapped up in their shadow and yet they don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot, isn't it? To face, huh?
Absolutely. 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 You say it at least 3 or 4 times. I picked up your bug.
So then I was wrong. There's one more.
Okay.
And here's Jung again. Oh, come back, come back. Here we go. With a little self-criticism, one can see through the shadow as far as its nature is personal. But when it appears as an archetype, one encounters the same difficulties as with the anima and the animus. In other words, it is quite within the bounds of possibility for a man to recognize the relative evil of his nature. But it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. Now that's
This is heavy.
so let's unpack that for a while, for a bit here. So he's
Sure.
talking about the
Sure.
face of absolute evil, or the archetype of evil
Mm-hmm.
as an archetype. So that's a collective unconscious face.
Mm-hmm.
I have my personal shadow
Mm-hmm.
and my issues. We call them my issues, my fear of abandonment, where my shadow becomes triggered, how I've become exactly like my abusive father. That was a big realization for me when I realized in my 40s that I'd become just as bad as my father. That was like a shock. Like, oh boy, I better start integrating my shadow because I'm exactly become what that which I hated in him. And
Mm-hmm.
so then that was the beginning for me of the work of integration of the shadow. But what happens when comes to the face of absolute evil? You know, like World War II, or or some really evil things that people are capable of doing, or just a real raw manifestation of Mother Nature, a lion jumping on a deer, the absolute brutality of nature, the archetype of Kali, the devouring mother, the rageful mother. The mother archetype is both beautiful and wonderful and nurturing, but it has a dark side to it. So coming face to face with the dark aspect of the mother, or the dark aspect of the masculine god, which we call the devil, that is what we call in psychological term a psychosis, where one actually is faced with something much deeper, and one can become possessed by it, so that one starts acting in a way that one is possessed by absolute evil. And that can lead to all kinds of really, really terrible things. And so, I guess the question that comes then is, how do we deal with that? How do we protect ourselves from these archetypal image that are so violent and destructive as evil itself.
Mhm.
And I think that when we talk about the shadow, that's not necessarily a possession with the darkest evil. We can see, and so, and definitely the darkest evil can enter into the personality through the window of the shadow. But when one becomes truly evil, that is a possession of an archetype, of an archetypal nature. So, what is your understanding of that word archetype?
Um, well, I think that on the personal level, your own mother and your own father and their attributes becomes a definition to the individual what is the mother and the father should be, or their behavior or what their patterns of behavior is to an individual becomes the norm until they begin to meet other mothers and other fathers, and they begin to reflect and understand what they like, what they don't like, what worked, what did not work, and they begin to reflect. But ultimately, at the bottom of the bottom is, if we do not address our shadows, we will become exactly as our parents from the archetype, and it will solidify in us as an archetypal personality of what our unhealthy ego, if you will, closed off in its own world. And this is why it leads to psychosis, because it is so constricted.
Mm-hmm.
We're always told to do and not to do, that you have
Mm-hmm.
no freedom of understanding yourself. You think that you're free because you left your parents' house. You think you're free because now you have the job and you're making money, but ultimately deep down inside you're so constricted and so ruled by the personalities and archetypes that does not belong to you, that deep, it's choking you and leads to psychosis.
Beautiful, beautiful. So so Jung looked at archetypes as models of behavior that are ingrained. He talked
Mhm.
about instincts and archetype being the same thing. So our relationship with, the mother archetype versus our own mother. So the mother archetype, just like a cat or an animal doesn't need to go to prenatal classes to know what to do. Instinctually, it has a relationship with the archetypal nature of mother, so
Mhm.
that it knows instinctively what to do.
Mhm.
So, in that sense, archetypes are what animates the world,
Mhm.
what personifies the world, and it's the same thing as instinct. They're naturally, so this archetype of the devil is an instinctual manifestation of the human darkness that exists in the world
Mhm.
as a counterbalance to the light, and
Mhm.
how the dark and the light, so now we're back to our diagram of the beginning, the light and the darkness.
Mhm.
So that number two, the binarious, the darkness, was understood as evil versus the light of God. And the counterbalance is essential in the definition of what light is, because if there's no darkness, then there's no light. If there's no bad, then there's no good. If there's no evil, then there's no God. And really, so then here we are in the paradox of the human existence. And that paradox plays itself in our own process between the light side of who we are and the dark side of who we are. And so the zodiac and astrology is a study of all of those archetypes and how they're decompose your own personality. Um, so it's a fascinating tool for analysis of our psychological nature
Mhm.
and for a support to the integration of our own shadow.
I can totally relate when my children were born and I was a young mother. 99% of the things I've done, they were completely and totally instinctual.
Mm-hmm.
And they rose up naturally within me. I responded without thought. And then, I would look back and say, I'm like, how did I know to do this? And I usually didn't have the answer to it. It's just an instinctual behavior.
And one could say that you were possessed by the mother archetype.
Correct. Correct.
And
Correct.
and in that sense, when we fall in love or when we mother or when we're angry, these archetypal natures, these psychological patterns take possession over us.
Hmm.
Really fascinating to see, huh?
Hmm.
How did you feel about this video so far? How are we doing?
So good. Are you
I was
done? You went through all your slides?
I believe so. I have one more slide, and I was going to say I need to put you on here too. I have my contact information here and what I do. And this is
Hmm.
the Healer and the Dreamer Astrology video channel. The Healer and the Dreamer weaves an insightful tapestry using astrology, alchemy, dream work, and the analytical psychology of Carl Gustav Jung to bring clarity to the path of self realization in our modern times. Thank you so much for joining me, my dear Ina. That was a lot of fun. And also want to thank all of the watchers and the subscribers and the supporters of the channel. Without, you, that's really kind of pointless to be doing this. So if you have any questions about what we went through or anything at all that you want to say, please comment, share. All of those things make us grow. Um, and um, and wow, that was a lot of fun, huh?
Yes, it was. Thank you, Martin. And
Mm.
thank you to all the listeners who will benefit from all of this.
And thank you, Great Mother, for guiding us. And please forgive all the little mistakes that we make. We do it in honest fashion, like
Yes.
the like the
We work on our elements as much as we can.
Oh, yes, we do. And it's an interesting beast, the technology, huh? And we do the best we
Mhm.
can. But like the Bhagavad Gita says, everything is covered with some type of fault.
Yes, it is.
And
Yeah.
so, thank you for seeing right through that, and thank you for seeing our sincerity. And again, thank you, Ina, for joining me. Was so exciting.
As always.
Oh,
The-
and the next chapter is fascinating, and we're gonna go deep. We're gonna go into the anima and the animus and the syzygy. That's gonna be fascinating. So we'll see you next time. Whoop. Here we go.